Thanks for joining us this week for New Mexico in Focus. I'm Gene Grant. Here at New Mexico in Focus, we bring you in-depth conversations about local issues, but sometimes we want to look outside our state to get a different perspective on national or even international politics. Earlier this fall, Ray McGovern came to Albuquerque to speak at an event with the local chapter of Veterans for Peace. Mr. McGovern is a retired CIA analyst. He's also an outspoken critic of U.S. foreign policies. He sat down with New Mexico in Focus producer Sarah Gustavus and City Councilor Ray Garduno to talk about our state's role in the national conversation about international policy.
I'm joined today by Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst. Thanks for being here. Also, Ray Garduno, current Albuquerque City Council member. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Ray, I want to start with you. You visited Albuquerque to talk about a specific treaty signed in 1928, and that was supposed to prevent other wars, but clearly that didn't prevent World War II. What's the treaty and why should we care today?
Well, it's the Kellogg-Briand Treaty, 1928. It banned all war as an instrument of national policy. And people are inclined to say, well, that didn't work. Well, it's not that that didn't work, it was that we didn't work. The conditions in 1928 were very ripe for the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany, and that was largely our fault by virtue of the imposition of incredible sanctions on economic development. So there are always ways to look back and figure out how we could have avoided this or that war. What we're trying to do is saying, hey, it is possible. Don't ditch the treaty. Keep the concept and work toward making it real.
Are people working toward making it real today?
A lot of us are. A lot of us face a big challenge because there's a lot of money in tensions and there's a lot of money in war. And peace, let's face it, is very bad for business. Now, I used to think lightly of President Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. I knew that he had intended earlier to call it the military-industrial congressional complex, and now I know why. Suffice it to say that it's real. It's very real, and it accounts for many of the wars that we have become involved in, because war is good for business, it's good for the corporations, and it's very good for the corporations that control our media, because they are profiteering from war. The media operation is a small segment of their business activity, and so the media operation is kind of attuned to not making any waves about whether this or that war is a good idea or not. Witness Iraq, witness Ukraine right now. The Americans are having a hard time finding out what the real story is on either of those, even though Iraq was, 12 years ago.
We'll come back to that in just a moment. Ray, I do want to ask you, it's hard, to acknowledge that 70 years ago, we had the first test of the atomic bomb here in New Mexico at the Trinity site. People are talking about that this year. How do you think that changes our conversation about war in New Mexico and our connection to that history?
Right. In some ways, Sarah, we are the epicenter of nuclear, not only weapons, but nuclear production, whether it's yellow cake from the Grants Gallup area, whether it's still a lot of warheads that are stored at Sandia. So if people think that this is only some international vague concept, it's not. It's right here at home. I presented a resolution to outlaw and to dismantle the warheads that presently exist at Kirtland Air Force Base. And when we asked the air base whether they existed, they said that they could neither deny nor affirm whether they existed. Weeks later, there was an article in the local paper about how there are up to 1,000 warheads, unarmed warheads, in the hills, the crevices, the caves, and the Manzano Mountains. So if that's not local, I don't know what is. I know a lot of people like to go on and on about how this is something that has to do with the federal government, has to do with other jurisdictions, and why is the lowly council involved, and especially some person who doesn't know that much about nuclear weapons or that much about international war. Well, I know one thing, war is not good for anything. And for us to continually talk about war as if it's a fait accompli, as something that we just have to accept, I liken it to when people talk about poverty. they love to talk about how, poverty will always be with us. Who ordained that? And who ordained that war is always going to be the instrument for settling differences, for making sure that humanity gets along? It's only the person, as Mr. McGovern has said, only the person who thinks that it's all right for us to expend the kinds of money we expend for war at the expense of everything else that we could do to better the lives of everyone.
Do you think, though, some people might say that if we as the city or as the state were to push some of those things out of our state, that would be a huge economic hit for our residents?
Right. Well, I'll give up my portion of the money that I make from that. So I don't think it's that big a deal. Some people that work there they may have to move out. I don't know. But to base the continual expenditure on something that's bad and then try to spin it as if it's an economic engine, it's just the wrong way to think. We have Sandia Labs here, a wonderful lab that does a lot of great things, but it also makes nuclear war triggers. I'm sure they could think of something else to do with that money that they get. There are amazing people. A lot of folks that I know that work at Sandia, I'm sure would rather be working on something else that is less lethal, less dire, and something that is used, I think, for evil. My opinion. But when we start equating jobs and economy with war, I think that's when we start going the wrong direction. And I think Mr. McGovern has spoken to that many occasions that I've had the opportunity to hear him speak about that. But to conflate economy with war is just the wrong thing to do.
And Ray, you've gotten a lot of attention. You've taken some pretty strong actions, gotten people paying attention to what you're saying, what you're doing around the country at an event for Hillary Clinton. Why do you feel like that's the way that you need to get your message heard?
Well, there are very few opportunities for us to get into the mainstream media. I had no idea that simply by standing up, turning my back to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, not saying a word, I couldn't imagine a more peaceful, nonviolent demonstration. And yet I was very violently treated right in front of her, about 4 rows in front of her, and people say she didn't miss a word. Well, she didn't miss a syllable. Go watch it on YouTube. So it wasn't trying to get attention, it was just trying to demonstrate that not everybody thought that what she had been doing around the world, which had fostered the kind of violence that we've seen in places like Syria, in places like Libya, for which she was largely responsible. That not everybody in that auditorium at George Washington University thought that she was saying the right thing. And frankly, it was also a kind of a flashback to my experience in the Soviet Union, because when a Soviet party leader would get up, everyone would stand for about 5 minutes and applaud. And then, in the midst of the speech, I used to read Pravda, and after every third paragraph, it would say, "Бурные аплодисменты, все стоят," which means stormy applause. Everyone stands. And so I'm watching this stormy applause for someone that I didn't think really merited this applause, but rather needed not to leave that auditorium thinking that everybody was in applause. Just stood with my back turned to her, and as it was, I never thought anything would happen, but it did. And if that brought attention to people like me, my age, who got beat up that way, a little curious thing, I learned from that experience when thousands and thousands of people called Hillary Clinton's office and sent emails. Americans don't like old people to get beat up, okay? Young people, I have a problem with those. But when they said a 71-year-old man was, Fox said he was escorted out of the auditorium. But when they saw how I was escorted. So my message to anyone who has this color hair on their head or beard, there's a big advantage there. We ought to put it into play. They're not going to kill you. Probably they won't break anything, although they did break my shoulder up in New York. So, take a little risk and show these young people that we care just as strongly about their future. And their future is in great jeopardy, not only because of wars, but because of climate change and because the U.S. defense, the armed forces, are the biggest polluter in the world. And that's established fact.
And Ray, what about you? You've been involved locally on efforts for peace, efforts for addressing violence abroad and here in our own community. What do you want people to be thinking about right now?
Well, you know, the main thing that needs to be thought about is what are we going to leave our children? I'm glad to hear Ray, Mr. McGovern, talk about gray hair, because it's not only a style, it's taken years to get there. And we've seen some things. Did we mess up along the way? Probably. Did we not do everything we should have? Probably. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to do the best we can all the time we can. I've joined a lot of efforts to make sure that peace is not just sort of a throwaway term, you know, some flippant discussion about how peace would cure everything. Peace is everything. That is the natural state. War is an unnatural state. So for people to talk about how there's a choice between peace and war is really the wrong choice to be, you know, promoting, especially, as I say, to young folks. The young folks who are the most intelligent beings right now. They have not had the experience we've had, but they're very intelligent. I work with youth, you know, and I'm humbled to say this, with youth, with the Southwest Organizing Project, with other folks who, on a daily basis, if you will, show me that they're not just blowing smoke and, you know, thinking of the next movie to go to or the next song to sing or whatever. They're really involved in making sure that climate change is an issue. I was in New York City. My son, who was involved with that, essentially got together 450,000 people. And if you've never seen that many people on 6th Avenue, you know, that is impressive. I was there at the invitation of my son. And I know that young people have, if not the answers, they certainly have the passion and they have the ability to work at things just like we did and have been and continue to do. And I'm proud to say that I never have balked when asked if where I stood when it comes to war or peace. I've always been on the peace side.
Well, I thank both of you for coming in and sharing your perspectives with us. That generational discussion, talking about the generations working together, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.